On a sweltering August morning in 1847, two of South Carolina's richest men made a bet that would shock everyone who heard it. One man wagered his strongest slave. The other, his 5 daughters. No one in Beaufort County could believe what they were hearing. What kind of father would make such a deal? And what kind of challenge could possibly pit a grown man against 5 young women? When the day of the wager came, people gathered by the dozens to see it. But when Colonel Nathaniel Pritchard's daughters finally appeared, the crowd fell silent. Their faces were blank, their eyes empty, and that was the moment everyone realized something was very, very wrong inside the walls of Willow Bend Plantation. Before we begin, if you love dark true history and untold American horrors, subscribe to Liturgy of Fear and tap the bell icon. We dig up the stories your textbooks left buried. Now, let's go back to Beaufort County, South Carolina, August 12, 1847. Part 1, The Wager at Willow Bend. Colonel Nathaniel Pritchard was not like other men of his time. Born into wealth, educated at the College of Charleston, and trained in Europe, he came home to South Carolina full of new ideas about discipline, efficiency, and human potential. When his wife Elizabeth died in 1838, after her 6th childbirth, something inside him broke and changed. Neighbors said the colonel became a ghost of himself. He stopped attending church, stopped entertaining guests, and stopped allowing anyone near his 5 daughters. He told curious visitors that he was personally overseeing their education, a program, he called it, one that would make them the most capable young women in America. But as the years passed, strange rumors began to swirl around the Willow Bend estate. The girls were never seen outside. No laughter came from the house. Even the servants said they weren't allowed upstairs after sunset. And yet, whenever the colonel rode into town, he carried himself like a man completely certain of his purpose. He claimed his daughters were thriving under his methods, that he had discovered a system for human perfection. The rivalry. Just down the road lived Judge Marcus Holloway, another powerful man with old money, old values, and a sharp tongue. The two had been rivals since boyhood. Their plantations shared a boundary that had been disputed for generations, and though they kept things civil, everyone knew there was bad blood. It all came to a head in July of 1847. At a gathering at the Beaufort County Courthouse, Judge Holloway was holding court, boasting about how the strength of his field hands proved that men were naturally superior to women in both labor and endurance. Pritchard, standing nearby, interrupted him. "You're wrong, Marcus," he said calmly. "Strength is not born, it's built. Proper training can make any human stronger than nature ever intended." Holloway laughed. "Are you suggesting your daughters could outwork my men, Nathaniel?" "I don't suggest," Pritchard said. "I know." The room erupted in laughter. "You've gone mad," Holloway said. "If you believe that, then prove it." And that's when Pritchard made his move. 3 days from now, he said, an endurance race. 30 miles through the roughest ground between our estates. Your strongest man, against my 5 daughters. Winner takes the disputed timber tract. The timber land was worth thousands. And in front of 60 witnesses, they shook hands. Most people thought it was a drunken joke, that Pritchard would come to his senses. But those who knew the colonel whispered that he never made bets he couldn't win. The day of the wager. August 12, 1847. The day broke hot and heavy, the kind of southern heat that feels alive, pressing on your chest. By 7 o'clock, nearly 60 people had gathered at the starting point. Planters, wives in parasols, county officials, and the curious few who loved a spectacle. Judge Holloway arrived first, with his competitor, a man named Samuel. Samuel was tall, broad, and known for his strength. But those who looked at him closely that morning said something about his face seemed uneasy. He looked like a man who wanted to be anywhere but there. Then, the Pritchards arrived. Colonel Nathaniel led the way, sitting tall on his horse, white-gloved hands gripping the reins. Behind him came 5 identical gray mares, each carrying one of his daughters. The crowd gasped. The girls looked like replicas, same dresses, same posture, same expressionless faces. Not one of them looked left or right. Their eyes didn't seem to see anything. One woman in the crowd would later say, "They looked like dolls." Beautiful dolls that had forgotten how to be alive. The start. Dr. Thaddeus Cromwell, a local physician, was there to ensure safety. He examined Samuel first, heartbeat steady, breathing strong. But when he approached the Pritchard girls, the colonel stepped in. "That won't be necessary," Pritchard said sharply. "Sir, it's only a precaution," the doctor replied. "My daughters are in perfect health. The race begins in 5 minutes. Cromwell hesitated, but when he looked at their hands, his stomach turned. The girls' palms were rough and scarred, calluses like those of laborers, not daughters of an aristocrat. At exactly 8 o'clock, a pistol cracked through the morning air. All 5 daughters moved as one. Their horses lunged forward in perfect formation, hoofs pounding like synchronized drums. Samuel hesitated, just 2 seconds, before following. Within half a minute, all 6 riders vanished into the trees. The first checkpoint. 10 miles in, at Willingham Creek Drive, Cromwell waited with 2 witnesses. At 10:15, they heard the thunder of hoofs. The 5 Pritchard daughters appeared, still in perfect formation, still silent, still moving as one. They didn't stop at the checkpoint. Didn't drink. Didn't even glance at the men shouting for them to pause. Cromwell called after them, but they rode past as if he didn't exist. 7 minutes later, Samuel arrived, drenched in sweat, breathing hard. The doctor flagged him down. "Son, are you all right?" Samuel didn't answer at first. He stared down the road where the girls had gone, his expression hollow. Then he said quietly, "Something's wrong with those girls, sir. That ain't natural." He swallowed hard. One of them fell at the creek. Horse stumbled. She hit her head, bleeding bad. But the others, they didn't stop. She just climbed back up and kept riding. Didn't make a sound. Didn't cry. And that was when Dr. Cromwell began to realize that whatever was happening inside Willow Bend, whatever those girls had been trained to do, this wasn't just a test of endurance. It was something much darker. What happened to the Pritchard daughters after that checkpoint would haunt every person who witnessed the race, and force 3 doctors to flee South Carolina before the year ended. In Part 2, we'll follow the riders deeper into the wilderness, and uncover the first horrifying signs of what the colonel had done to his own children. So subscribe to Liturgy of Fear, hit that bell icon, and tell us in the comments. Would you have stayed to see how this race ended? Because next time, you'll wish they hadn't. Would you like me to continue with Part 2, The Race into the Pines, same tone and 1,000 words? The Willow Bend Experiment, Part 2, The Race of Obedience. Hook 000 to 040. When the race began that August morning in 1847, people thought they were watching a strange contest between 2 wealthy men. But by the time it ended, they realized they had witnessed something inhuman. One girl was bleeding from the head. Another collapsed from exhaustion. And yet not one of them cried, screamed, or asked for help. Their father called it training. Dr. Thaddeus Cromwell called it something else, a nightmare dressed as discipline. Before we return to the story, make sure you're subscribed to Liturgy of Fear, where we uncover the hidden horrors of America's past, the stories history tried to bury. Now, let's go back to Beaufort County, South Carolina, where the Willow Bend race turned into something no one would ever forget. The first sign of evil. At the first checkpoint, Drive, Cromwell had already seen enough to know something was wrong. The youngest daughter, Virginia, had fallen from her horse at the creek crossing, hit her head, and was bleeding. But instead of helping her, the other girls rode on as if they hadn't seen a thing. Samuel, the enslaved man racing against them, had stopped to help her, but when she got back on her horse without a single sound, he felt his stomach twist. She didn't cry, he told Cromwell. Didn't even blink, just got up and kept going. Cromwell felt a cold chill crawl up his spine. "Which direction?" he asked. Samuel pointed toward the ridge. "That way. But I ain't chasing them anymore, sir. This ain't right. I can't be part of it." Before the doctor could respond, Samuel turned his horse around and left the race behind, a decision that probably saved his life. The second checkpoint. Cromwell rode hard through the pine forest toward the ridge checkpoint. The sun burned overhead, and the air was thick enough to choke on. When he arrived around 11:30, Officials confirmed the daughters had passed 20 minutes earlier. The youngest had blood on her face, one said. Didn't even slow down. We tried to stop her, but they rode right past. Cromwell didn't hesitate. We're stopping this race, he ordered. Come with me. The officials exchanged nervous glances, but they followed. Something about the doctor's tone, the fear in his voice, told them this was no ordinary competition. The finding. They caught up to the Pritchard daughters 3 miles from the finish line. Even from a distance, the sight froze Cromwell's blood. The formation had broken. 4 horses still moved forward, their riders swaying dangerously. The 5th had stopped completely. Its rider, the youngest, hung limp over the saddle. Cromwell spurred his horse faster. When he reached them, he saw the truth up close. Virginia was unconscious, her head wound reopened. Elizabeth, the second youngest, was barely conscious, face pale, blood streaking down her neck. The 3 oldest girls still rode forward, their eyes glassy, lips cracked and bleeding, skin blistered from the heat. Stop, Cromwell shouted. For God's sake, stop. But they didn't. They kept going, silent, mechanical, as if their bodies no longer belonged to them. Cromwell cut off one of the horses, grabbing the bridle. It was Caroline, the eldest. Her pupils were blown wide, her hands shaking. Caroline, he shouted, you need help. The race is over. She blinked at him, confused, her voice barely a whisper. Please, we have to finish. We have to. You need medical attention, he said. She shook her head weakly. No, we have to finish, he said, her face twisted in terror. We have to finish. Behind them, the officials caught up. 2 of the sisters were delirious. One was mumbling nonsense. The youngest didn't move at all. Cromwell felt his throat close. What has your father done to you? Caroline's face suddenly changed, panic replaced by a cold, blank stare. Her voice flattened into something robotic. We have to finish the race. The father arrives. Moments later, the sound of hoofbeats thundered behind them. Colonel Nathaniel Pritchard emerged from the trees, his face dark with fury. What is the meaning of this? He barked. Get out of their way. Colonel Pritchard, Cromwell said, your daughters are in medical crisis. One is unconscious, the others are severely dehydrated. This race is over. They're fine, Pritchard snapped. They've been trained for exactly this. Let them proceed. Your youngest daughter is unconscious. Cromwell shouted. The race ends when they cross the line. You have no authority here. As a physician, Cromwell said firmly, I have every authority. These girls could die. For a moment, something dangerous flickered in the colonel's eyes. His hand moved toward the pistol at his belt, then stopped. His expression shifted instantly, rage vanishing behind a calm, polite mask. Of course, doctor, he said evenly. You're right, let's get them home. That sudden change, that false composure, chilled Cromwell more than the anger had. The examination. A wagon was sent for the girls. By the time it reached Willow Bend, word of what had happened spread across Beaufort County. Neighbors gathered near the gates, whispering as Pritchard appeared, every inch the concerned father. Thank you for your concern, he said smoothly. My daughters are tired but well. They'll rest now. But drive. Cromwell wasn't fooled. He demanded to examine the girls immediately. Pritchard refused at first, until Cromwell threatened a formal complaint to the county. What the doctor discovered inside that mansion would haunt him for the rest of his life. He documented everything in his private medical journal. Evidence of long-term physical conditioning beyond anything appropriate, he wrote. Muscle development suggests years of intense labor and exertion. Multiple healed fractures, fingers, ribs, collarbone. All consistent with repeated injury. But what disturbed him most wasn't their bodies. It was their minds. They show minimal emotional reaction, he wrote. Even during painful examinations. Repeatedly asked if they performed adequately. When I expressed concern, the eldest, Caroline, said, Father says pain is weakness being corrected. The truth revealed. That night, when the colonel left the room, Caroline began to cry silently, the first real emotion Cromwell had seen from any of them. Mother told me to be strong enough to run away one day, she whispered. But I'm not. None of us are. He made sure we'd never be strong enough for that. When her father returned, she went silent. Her face turned blank again. Cromwell closed his journal with shaking hands. "These girls are prisoners," he wrote, "subjects of calculated cruelty disguised as education. Yet by South Carolina law, I have no recourse. A father's authority is absolute." Samuel's testimony. Samuel, the man who had refused to finish the race, tried to raise the alarm. 3 days later, he requested a private meeting with Judge Holloway. "I told him those girls weren't right," Samuel later said in a deposition. "They didn't move like people. Didn't look at you, looked through you. Like horses broke too hard. That's what had been done to them. When the little one fell, bleeding, and climbed back up without a sound, I knew I was watching something evil." He told the judge to get those girls help. But Holloway never did. No one did. And within months, one of the Pritchard daughters would be dead. To be continued. In Part 3, we return to Willow Bend, where silence hangs over the house and one daughter disappears without explanation. What drive Cromwell found in her room would make even the bravest man flee South Carolina forever. Subscribe to Liturgy of Fear and tap the bell so you don't miss Part 3, The Dollmaker's House. And tell us in the comments, what do you think Colonel Pritchard was really training his daughters for? Would you like me to continue with Part 3, The Dollmaker's House, next? Same tone and 1,000 words. The Pritchard Curse, Part 3, The Silent House. Something was wrong at Willow Bend. Everyone in Beaufort County could feel it. The gates never opened anymore. No laughter from the porch, no riders on the long dirt road. Just that big white house sitting quiet under the moss-draped oaks. Too quiet. And when silence settles that deep, it usually means something terrible is growing inside. The story. After the strange horse race that left Virginia Pritchard broken and bleeding, the town tried to forget. But drive. Cromwell couldn't. He told people they needed to get those girls help, but no one listened. The law said a father ruled his household, and Colonel Pritchard ruled his like a general. The disputed 50 acres went to Judge Holloway after the race, but nobody noticed that Pritchard didn't even care. Maybe the land was never the point. Maybe the whole race had been his way to prove something, to the town, to himself, to God. Weeks passed. The Pritchard gates stayed shut. The daughters vanished from view. Even the servants whispered less and less. From outside, the place looked frozen in time. But inside those tall white walls, something was moving. Something dark. Dr. Cromwell tried twice to visit that fall, pretending to check on Virginia's recovery. Both times he was turned away. On his second visit, he saw a face at an upstairs window, Caroline, holding a white scrap of paper against the glass. A silent plea for help. He wrote to the Charleston Medical Society, begging them to intervene. Their reply came 3 weeks later. No proof, no action. He was told to drop it. But Cromwell didn't. He began writing everything he knew, keeping a private journal that would later become the only record of what truly happened inside Willow Bend. Inside the mansion, Caroline was keeping her own record. Since her mother's death 9 years earlier, she and her sisters had lived under rules that grew stranger by the year. At first it was strict writing practice. Then cold lectures about discipline. Then something darker, punishment disguised as training. The failed race had changed everything. For the first time, outsiders had seen her father lose control. Caroline saw fear in his eyes, fear of being exposed. And fear, she realized, meant weakness. So she started to write. Every beating, every injury, every order, she hid her notes under a loose floorboard. Someday, someone would find them. Someone would know the truth. Their governess, Miss Sarah Lindley, had stayed on for years out of duty, but she was breaking too. She'd seen too much. The girls weren't children anymore. They were blank, quiet shadows, doing everything their father demanded. In November 1847, she went to Judge Holloway herself. She told him everything, about the endless drills, the injuries, the punishments. When she finished, the judge sighed. "Miss Lindley, what you've told me is terrible," he said. "But it's not illegal. A father can raise his daughters however he sees fit. Unless you can prove he's committing criminal cruelty, there's nothing I can do." Miss Lindley stared at him. So they're trapped. Unless they marry or he dies, the judge answered quietly. Yes. She left his office shaking. Sometimes law can be worse than evil, it can make evil untouchable. Winter came, and strange things began happening at Willow Bend. Colonel Pritchard spent hours alone in his study with military manuals and medical books spread open before him. He talked to himself about proving the concept and refining the experiment. Caroline heard enough to understand. He didn't see the failed race as a mistake. He saw it as a test that needed improvement. One night in January, he came into the library where Caroline was reading. You're the eldest, he said. You understand what I'm doing. Caroline nodded slowly. Yes, father. He paced. Most people are weak. Your mother was weak. But you, my daughters, are proof that discipline can perfect the human body. You are my life's work. Caroline whispered. Created. He turned cold. Refined. Improved. Made better than nature intended. Then he leaned close. Your feelings don't matter. You exist to prove a principle. That night she wrote in her secret journal. Father is planning something worse. We are no longer his daughters. We are specimens. By February, crates arrived, medical tools, scientific instruments, jars of chemicals. An old outbuilding was renovated into something that looked halfway between a gymnasium and a laboratory. Locks on the outside, observation windows high near the roof. In March, the colonel began giving her sisters new supplements. Margaret grew weak. Anne's hands shook constantly. Virginia drifted in and out of reality. Caroline tried to warn them, but they only smiled blankly. Years of training had hollowed them out. She realized if anyone was going to save them, it had to be her. So she wrote a long, desperate letter. She described the new facility, the drugs, the punishments. At the end she begged. Someone must intervene before Father's next experiment begins. She gave the letter to Ruth, one of the enslaved women who did the family laundry. Ruth promised to try to pass it to someone at Judge Holloway's estate, but she knew the risk. 3 days later, Colonel Pritchard gathered his daughters in the parlor. He held the letter in his hand, his face white with rage. Who wrote this? He demanded. Silence. Then his eyes found Caroline. It was you. The woman confessed. You've betrayed me. He crushed the paper. Weakness, always weakness. He turned to the others. Your sister will be isolated until she learns loyalty. Let that be a lesson. That night Caroline was locked inside the new facility, bare walls, a cot, a few cruel pieces of equipment. Before closing the door, her father whispered. You wanted outside intervention. You'll get it. In 2 weeks I'll host physicians from Charleston. They'll see what true discipline can create. The lock turned. The sound echoed like a coffin closing. Ruth was sold 2 days later to a Mississippi broker. Everyone understood what that meant. But before she was taken away, she had shown the letter to Samuel, the stable hand. He memorized every word, and when Ruth disappeared, he went straight to Judge Holloway. Sir, he said, that man's going to kill those girls. Maybe not all at once, but he will. Holloway rubbed his temples. What do you expect me to do? The law gives him full authority. Then the law is wrong. The room went silent. Holloway stared at him, then nodded slowly. Maybe it is, he said. So we'll make witnesses. He began quietly spreading word among the planters, an invitation to the colonel's scientific demonstration. If they all came, at least the horror would have eyes on it. May 19, 1848. Carriages rolled up to Willow Bend one after another. Doctors, professors, planters, all curious about the colonel's experiment. Inside, the outbuilding looked like a medical theater, rows of chairs, gleaming instruments, notebooks ready for observations. Colonel Pritchard stood proudly before them. Gentlemen, he said, today you'll witness the next step in human refinement. My daughters will demonstrate strength and discipline. Beyond ordinary limits. He opened the door. 5 girls entered in matching white dresses, moving in perfect synchronization. Their faces were blank, their eyes empty, like dolls that remembered being human. And at the front of the line, pale but burning inside, walked Caroline. To be continued in Part 4. Checkmark next video title. The Pritchard Curse, Part 4, the demonstration of madness. Tone: Gothic, tragic, and escalating toward revelation. Would you like me to write part 4, 1000 words next in the same YouTube narration style? The Pritchard Curse, Part 4, The Demonstration of Madness. They called it a scientific demonstration. But what the guests saw that morning at Willow Bend was not science. It was something far darker. A man trying to prove that discipline could erase the soul. The story: the morning sun turned the Pritchard estate gold, but the air inside the new training hall was cold as a tomb. 23 guests filled the semicircle of chairs: doctors, professors, planters, men of reason and reputation. Every one of them believed they'd come to witness progress. None were prepared for what they were about to see. Colonel Pritchard stood tall before them, hands clasped behind his back. "Gentlemen," he said proudly, "for 10 years I have refined the human body and mind through total discipline. Today you will witness the results." He gestured toward the door. "My daughters." The door creaked open. 5 girls stepped in, white dresses, bare feet, braided hair. They walked in perfect rhythm, eyes straight ahead. There were no smiles, no flicker of recognition. They looked like ghosts wearing human skin. A nervous laugh rippled through the audience, then silence. The colonel smiled. "Observe their posture, their focus. They are models of human perfection. Only drive." Cromwell, seated near the front, felt his stomach twist. He'd come hoping to protect them. Now he understood. He was too late. The demonstration began. First, strength tests. Margaret lifted heavy iron weights until her arms shook, the colonel shouting commands. "Higher. Hold. Do not falter." She bit her lip until blood ran down her chin, but she didn't make a sound. Next came pain tolerance. Anne pressed her hand against a candle flame, eyes wide, face expressionless. The smell of burning flesh filled the air. One professor gagged. Another whispered, "Good God." Pritchard smiled. Control of the body begins with mastery of pain. Then came endurance. Virginia ran laps around the room until she stumbled, her breathing ragged. The colonel barked at her to continue. She fell again. Still, he demanded she rise. And all the while, Caroline watched, waiting, thinking, planning. She knew this was her only chance. Do something now, or die as her father's proof. After the physical trials came obedience drills. Pritchard ordered them to perform in perfect unison: kneel, rise, turn, repeat. They moved like machines. Finally, he called Caroline forward. "The eldest has achieved the highest level of control," he announced. "She will now demonstrate the final stage: mental discipline under duress." He handed her a pistol. "You will fire near your sister's head. Hold your hand steady. Show them fear is nothing." The room froze. Caroline's fingers trembled as she took the gun. She looked at her sisters, pale, shaking, eyes empty. "Doctor." Cromwell stood up. "Colonel Pritchard, this is madness." But the colonel raised a hand. "Sit down, doctor. This is science." Caroline lifted the gun. The world seemed to narrow. The hall, the faces, her father's cold eyes. She realized this was it, the moment she'd been waiting for. She turned the gun, slowly, until it pointed not at her sister but directly at her father. The guests gasped. Her voice was steady. "You wanted proof of discipline, father. Here it is. I've learned control. Enough to end this." For a heartbeat, the world stood still. The colonel didn't move. His face didn't change. Then, almost calmly, he said, "You won't pull the trigger. You're still weak." Caroline's hands shook, but not from fear. From rage. Years of pain, loss, humiliation, all boiling to the surface. Then she said quietly, "You're right. Weakness runs in this family. But it isn't mine." She squeezed the trigger. Click. The gun wasn't loaded. The colonel laughed. "I removed the bullets this morning. I expected defiance." "Predictable." He stepped forward, snatching the pistol from her hand. "You've proven my theory, my dear. Even rebellion can be trained away." He turned to the horrified guests. "As you can see, resistance is temporary. The mind can be broken, reshaped. Discipline is absolute." Cromwell shouted, "You call this discipline? You've destroyed them." Others murmured, some rising from their seats. But Pritchard's voice thundered over them. I have perfected them. And then, something broke. Margaret collapsed, shaking violently. Anne screamed, a sound that didn't sound human. Virginia stumbled forward, her eyes rolling back. The doctors rushed in, chaos filling the room. Cromwell caught Caroline's arm. "Run," he hissed. "Get out while you can." Pritchard tried to stop her, but Caroline darted toward the door. The colonel lunged, grabbing her hair, dragging her back. "You don't leave," he roared. "You'll finish what we started." The guests shouted, struggling to separate them. Then, in the scuffle, one of the candles tipped. Flames spilled across the floor, onto the curtains, the equipment, the papers. Within seconds, the room was on fire. Pritchard screamed for order, but smoke filled the air. Caroline tore free, coughing, her dress catching sparks. Cromwell pulled her toward the door, dragging her outside as glass shattered behind them. The building roared with flame. By the time they reached the main house lawn, half the guests had escaped. The rest were trapped or trying to save the sisters. Caroline turned back, screaming her sisters' names. From the doorway, she saw them, 3 figures standing together, flames curling behind them, faces blank as ever. For a moment, she thought they were going to walk out. Then the roof collapsed. The sound was like thunder. She fell to her knees. Cromwell tried to pull her away, but she wouldn't move. Smoke poured into the morning sky, thick and black. And then she saw him, her father, staggering through the firelight, face half burned, eyes wild. He was alive. He pointed at her, voice broken. "This isn't over, Caroline. I'll rebuild. I'll prove it." Then the wall behind him gave way, and he vanished into the inferno. Hours later, the ruins of Willow Bend smoldered. Bodies were pulled from the wreckage. 3 of the sisters were gone. Margaret barely clung to life. Caroline sat silent beside her, her face streaked with soot and tears. "Doctor," Cromwell told the men nearby, "if anyone asks, the cause was accidental. For her sake." But he knew better. Nothing about what happened at Willow Bend was an accident. It was punishment. As night fell, Caroline stared at the ashes. The mansion loomed behind her, windows cracked, roof half collapsed. The air still smelled of smoke and despair. She whispered to herself, "You wanted a demonstration, Father. Now the world will remember yours." The wind rose, carrying a low, eerie sound through the ruined fields, half moan, half whisper. As if the house itself was still alive, breathing, waiting. And in that moment, Caroline knew. Her father's curse wasn't gone. It had only just begun. Candle to be continued in Part 5, Ashes of Willow Bend. Would you like me to continue with Part 5, 1000 words, next, showing the aftermath of the fire and how the horror spreads beyond the estate? The Pritchard Curse, Part 5, Ashes of Willow Bend. They thought the fire ended it all. They buried the dead, sealed the ruins, and tried to forget. But some fires don't die when the flames go out. They live on, burning inside those who survived. The story. The morning after the fire, smoke still curled above the blackened skeleton of Willow Bend. Ash drifted like snow across the fields. Everything was silent except for the caw of distant crows and the crackle of cooling embers. Dr. Cromwell stood with the sheriff and a handful of townsmen, staring at what was left. The once proud house was gone, only the stone foundation remained. Beside it lay the charred frame of the training hall. The sheriff removed his hat. "God help those poor girls." Cromwell nodded grimly. 3 dead, 1 missing, 1 barely alive. Which one survived? The eldest, Caroline. He didn't mention that she hadn't spoken a word since being pulled from the fire. Didn't mention that when she looked at him, her eyes seemed hollow, like something had burned out inside her too. They took her to Beaufort, to an old house on the edge of town where Cromwell arranged for care. Margaret, the next eldest, lingered 2 days before dying quietly in her sleep. That left Caroline, the last of the Pritchard daughters. Rumors spread quickly. Some said she'd gone mad. Others whispered she'd been cursed. A few claimed they'd seen her walking the ruins at night, barefoot in her soot-stained gown, calling her sisters' names. By summer's end, the townsfolk avoided the old Pritchard property entirely. Children dared each other to sneak near the burned gates. None ever made it past the fence. Cromwell visited Caroline every week. At first, she sat motionless, eyes fixed on the window. Then one afternoon, she spoke softly. "Did they find him?" Cromwell shook his head. "Your father's body wasn't recovered." She turned toward him, voice flat. "Then he's not dead." He tried to reassure her. The fire was too strong. No one could have survived that. Caroline's gaze didn't move. "He's not gone, doctor. I hear him sometimes, in the walls, in the wind." Cromwell wanted to believe it was grief, nothing more. But he'd been to the ruins himself. He'd seen footprints in the ash, large, bare footprints leading from the burned training hall toward the woods. They vanished after 20 yards. But they'd been there. In September, Caroline began to draw. At first, simple sketches, trees, faces, the house before it burned. Then the drawings changed. She began to draw the basement that had never been mentioned in any plans of Willow Bend. "Where is this?" Cromwell asked one morning. Her pencil froze. "Beneath the training hall. Father called it the foundation." Her voice trembled. "He said that's where strength begins." The next week, she gave him another drawing, metal tables, restraints, tools. In one corner, faint outlines of human figures. Cromwell felt his stomach twist. "Caroline, did he hurt you there?" She didn't answer. She just whispered, "He built something down there. Something that didn't burn." That night, Cromwell returned to Willow Bend. The moon hung low, pale over the blackened remains. He brought a lantern, shovel, and notebook. He found what he was looking for, an old stone door half buried under collapsed beams near the foundation's edge. It took an hour to dig it free. The metal handle was cold as ice. When he pried it open, a wave of foul, trapped air spilled out. He gagged, holding the lantern forward. A narrow staircase descended into the earth. Each step creaked. The deeper he went, the colder it became. Lantern light danced across. Brick walls streaked with soot and something darker. At the bottom stood a small chamber, part cellar, part laboratory. Cromwell's hands shook as he raised the light. Jars lined the walls, jars filled with preserved tissue, bones, organs. Some labeled with dates, others marked only with initials. On the far table lay a scorched notebook. He flipped it open carefully. The handwriting was unmistakable. Colonel Nathaniel Pritchard. "Pain is purification. Weakness must be erased through repetition. The eldest shows potential for complete obedience. The youngest resists, further conditioning required. Demonstration delayed until specimen stability improves." Cromwell's pulse pounded. Specimen. Not daughter. Not child. Specimen. Then he heard something, a sound behind him. A faint scrape. He turned sharply, lantern trembling. Nothing. Only shadows. He took a step back, and froze. Footprints. Fresh ones. Bare, heavy, pressed into the dust. Leading toward the far wall. And stopping there. Cromwell raised the light. The wall wasn't solid, it had a narrow crack running from floor to ceiling. Inside that crack, something gleamed, metal hinges. A hidden door. He hesitated. His instincts screamed to leave. But curiosity, or duty, pushed him forward. He pulled the door open. What lay beyond wasn't a room. It was a narrow tunnel, carved deep into the earth, stretching toward the woods. A foul, cold wind drifted from its depths. On the wall, scratched in charcoal, were 5 words. "He does not sleep here." Cromwell stumbled back, heart hammering. The lantern flickered. Then he heard it. A faint shuffle, somewhere down the tunnel. Then a voice, low, hoarse, familiar. "Doctor, always curious." The lantern went out. When Cromwell came to, he was lying outside the ruins, covered in ash, his lantern shattered beside him. His notebook was gone, and across the dirt, carved deep into the ground, were the same 5 words he'd seen below. "He does not sleep here." 2 days later, Caroline disappeared. Her window was open, the latch broken from the inside. The nurse swore she'd checked on her hours earlier. Caroline had been asleep. No one saw her leave. But that night, farmers near the Pritchard property swore they heard horses in the fields, 5 of them, galloping hard through the fog. Voices crying out, laughter echoing across the empty land. When Cromwell visited the ruins again, he found something waiting on the old gatepost. A piece of paper, half burned, held down by a rusted nail. It was a page from Caroline's secret journal. In her handwriting, smeared with soot, were the final words she ever wrote. He was right. Discipline can erase fear, but not memory. The fire didn't end us. It only set us free. That night, lightning flashed above Willow Bend. For a brief second, the burned house seemed whole again, its windows glowing like eyes. Then darkness swallowed it, and from the woods, faint and steady, came the rhythmic sound of hoofbeats. 5 of them, riding toward the ridge. Candle to be continued in Part 6, The Return to Willow Bend. Would you like me to continue with Part 6, 1000 Words, where Cromwell's journal vanishes, strange sightings begin, and the haunting spreads through Beaufort County? The Pritchard Curse, Part 6, The Whispers of Beaufort. The fire was supposed to erase the past. But the past doesn't burn, it waits. And now, in the quiet corners of Beaufort, the curse has begun to whisper again. The story. The year was 1892, 2 years after the fire at Willow Bend. Most of Beaufort had convinced itself that the Pritchard story was over. The ruins still stood like a black scar on the land, but people learned to look away. Only drive. Cromwell knew the truth, because he had seen what still moved beneath that ash. He kept his notes hidden in a locked drawer, the key worn on a chain around his neck. Every night he'd hear it again, the faint thud of hooves in the fog. The echo of laughter carried by the tide. He stopped sleeping. He stopped visiting the ruins. But the ruins did not stop visiting him. It began with the patients. Beaufort's small hospital sat near the marsh, and strange cases started to appear. A fisherman pulled from the river with strange markings carved into his arms. Not letters, but numbers, arranged in rows. A child found wandering near the cemetery, whispering the same phrase over and over. Foundations growing, foundations growing. When Cromwell examined them, their eyes were the same, glassy, hollow. Like Caroline's had been before she vanished. The townsfolk whispered. Some said the Pritchard ghosts were haunting the living. Others believed it was something worse. That Caroline had returned, and she wasn't alone. One night, as Cromwell walked home through the fog, he saw a light on the ridge. It flickered where Willow Bend once stood. At first, he thought it was lightning. Then he realized, it was a lantern, swaying slowly back and forth. He gripped the rail fence, heart pounding. For a moment, the figure holding the lantern became visible. A woman in a white dress, hair long and matted, face hidden. Then the light went out. The next morning, the sheriff rode to town with grim news. The Miller farm, 3 miles from the old Pritchard estate, had burned overnight. The barn reduced to cinders. And inside, they found 5 sets of footprints in the soot, bare, human, leading away from the fire in perfect formation. When Cromwell heard that number, 5, his blood ran cold. That afternoon, he gathered his courage and returned to the ruins. The forest had begun to swallow them, vines twisting around black stone, roots cracking through charred wood. The air was still, heavy with the smell of wet earth. He carried a new lantern, a revolver, and his trembling resolve. The ground near the old foundation was uneven now, as if something beneath had shifted, pushing upward. He crouched, running his hand over the soil. It was warm, too warm. Then, faintly, he heard it again. The sound that had haunted his sleep. Hooves. Slow, heavy, approaching. He spun around. Nothing. Only fog moving between the trees. But when he looked down again, fresh hoofprints were forming in the dirt. No horse. No rider. Just prints, appearing one by one, as if pressed by invisible weight. Cromwell fled. He didn't stop until he reached his office in town, bolting the door behind him. He tried to write it all down, to rationalize, to analyze. He needed evidence. He needed proof he wasn't mad. But when he opened his drawer for his journal, the pages inside were blank. Every word, every note, every drawing, gone. Only a single line remained, scrawled in his own handwriting. He does not sleep here. 3 nights later, Beaufort changed forever. A storm rolled in from the coast, fierce and sudden. Wind howled through the streets, rattling shutters, tearing signs from posts. And above the noise, bells. The church bell, tolling by itself. Then the bell of the courthouse. Then the bell of the schoolhouse, all ringing in perfect rhythm. Though no one was there to pull the ropes, people poured into the streets, clutching lanterns, shouting over the wind. From the marsh came a strange sound. The low, steady chant of 100 voices, all repeating in unison. Foundation endures. Foundation endures. Lightning flashed, and for one terrifying moment, everyone saw them. 5 riders at the edge of town. Their faces hidden beneath veils of smoke. Their horses black as shadow. And leading them, a woman in white. Caroline Pritchard. Her face, pale as bone, her eyes glowing faintly gold in the lightning. She raised a hand. The chanting stopped, and then, as the thunder rolled, she whispered, "Behold the fruits of Father's labor." The next flash of light. They were gone. When the storm passed, the town was silent. No footprints, no hoof marks, but every bell rope in Beaufort was severed clean through. And on each church door, someone, or something, had carved a single symbol. A circle divided by 5 lines. The Pritchard seal. In the days that followed, Beaufort became a ghost of itself. People packed their wagons and fled west. The sheriff, once the bravest man in the county, left his badge nailed to the church gate. Only Cromwell stayed behind, driven by equal parts guilt and obsession. He spent weeks studying that symbol, searching every book he could find. He learned that 5 lines crossing within a circle had appeared centuries before. Used by secret societies in Europe, marks of loyalty. Binding the living to their foundation. It was never meant to represent family. It represented continuation, survival beyond death. Cromwell's final entry in his second journal read, "They are not ghosts. They are the foundation reborn." The colonel's design was not to raise soldiers, but to replace them. That night, as he set his pen down, a knock came at his door. 3 slow knocks. He froze. When he opened it, no one was there. Only a letter pinned to the frame with a rusted nail. He tore it free and opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a page torn from his first missing notebook. The one he'd lost at Willow Bend. Across it, written in blood-dark ink, "The foundation grows. You are part of it now." He dropped the paper, heart hammering. And as he turned toward the mirror across the room, he saw movement behind his reflection. 5 shadowed figures standing in the doorway. Their faces shrouded, their eyes faintly burning through the dark. Candle to be continued in Part 7, The Journal of the Damned. Would you like me to continue with Part 7, 1000 words, where Cromwell's final journal reveals the secret of the foundation, and the curse spreads beyond Beaufort? The Pritchard Curse, Part 7, The Journal of the Damned. A journal found in the ruins of Willow Bend may hold the truth behind the Pritchard Curse. But some truths don't set you free. They pull you deeper into the dark. The story. When the sheriff found Drive, Cromwell's house abandoned, the door still locked from inside, he expected another tragedy, another victim of the foundation's madness. But what he discovered instead was worse. The old doctor's lamp was still burning, barely flickering on his desk. And beside it sat a leather-bound book, its pages soaked from spilled ink. Across the cover, scrawled in a shaky hand, "The Journal of the Damned." That was the last thing Cromwell ever wrote. The sheriff took it to the courthouse, unsure what to do. He called for Reverend Harlan, the oldest preacher in Beaufort County. They opened it together under the dull gray light of dawn. The first line chilled them both. "They are not dead. They are perfect." Cromwell's writing was frantic, ink smudged, words cramped and trembling. He described visions that came every night since the storm. He wrote of hearing footsteps circling his home at midnight, of whispers through the walls that sounded like his own voice. And worse, he claimed he'd seen Caroline Pritchard standing in the reflection of his lamp glass, watching him write. "They've mastered imitation," the doctor wrote. The foundation was never about discipline, it was about transformation. The colonel discovered a way to preserve consciousness through repetition, through suffering. The mind breaks, reforms, and in that new shape, something else lives inside. The reverend crossed himself, muttering, "Blasphemy." But the sheriff kept reading. Cromwell detailed strange symbols, 5 intersecting lines forming a circle. He said they weren't markings of power but of transfer. A vessel for identity. Each line represented a stage of change: pain, obedience, silence, endurance, rebirth. When all 5 were achieved, the body became an instrument, and the mind, replaced. By page 30, the doctor's tone changed. His notes became colder, detached, as though written by someone else. The foundation must continue. I understand now. Pain is purification. The flesh is temporary. The will endures. Then came a series of entries that seemed impossible. Dates from after his supposed disappearance. Entries describing visits to town, meetings with local men, even new subjects chosen for testing. The sheriff's hand trembled as he turned those pages. There had been disappearances, 3 in fact. All after the storm, all young men who worked on the docks. Cromwell's writing ended abruptly mid-sentence. And beneath the last word, pressed into the paper so hard it tore, was a single thumbprint, burned black. The Reverend wanted to burn the book right there in the courthouse stove. But the sheriff stopped him. "This is evidence," he said. "Proof of what's happening." He didn't realize that keeping the journal was exactly what it wanted. That night, the sheriff locked it in his desk drawer. By morning, the drawer was open, and empty. 2 days later, Beaufort's undertaker, Henry Lowe, was the first to claim he saw Cromwell again. He swore under oath that the doctor came to his door at midnight, asking for 5 caskets, all the same size, Henry said, and when I asked who they were for, he smiled and said, "They're not for the dead." Henry tried to show the sheriff the order the next day, but the paper had vanished from his counter. And that night, his house caught fire. They found him outside, eyes wide open, whispering. They walked out of the flames. He died before dawn. By midsummer, the fear spread beyond Beaufort. Travelers spoke of shadowed figures seen along the old river road. Women walking barefoot through the fog, faces veiled, moving in perfect step. 5 at a time, always 5. Some said they were the daughters. Others said they were new recruits, the Foundation's next generation. A merchant from Savannah described passing the ruins of Willow Bend at sunset. He claimed the windows glowed from inside. And faintly, over the sound of crickets, he heard the rhythm of marching. Slow, mechanical, endless. Then came the letter. It arrived at the Charleston Medical Society with no return address. But the handwriting matched Drive. Cromwell's precisely. Inside were 2 things. A page from his original journal. And a message, written in crimson ink. Greater than, the Foundation grows. The experiment continues. Come and witness perfection reborn. At the bottom was a date. September 15, 1892. On that day, against all reason, 5 physicians from Charleston traveled to Beaufort. They intended to find answers, perhaps fame. But only one came back. He arrived at the port 2 days later, raving about the hall beneath the earth. He said they were still there, moving in circles, whispering lessons in perfect unison. He said Caroline led them. And behind her stood her father, the colonel, his face a hollow mask of gray flesh and white eyes. When the doctors tried to calm him, he screamed a single phrase before his heart gave out. The Foundation doesn't end, it rebuilds. After that, no one dared travel north of the river. The old road was sealed, and Willow Bend was left to rot. But those who lived nearby swore the chanting never stopped. On quiet nights, if the wind blew right, you could still hear them. 5 voices repeating the same words over and over. Pain is the gate. Silence is the key. Foundation endures. In 1895, a young reporter from Charleston named Eli Mercer came to investigate. He wanted to write about the Beaufort ghosts, thinking it was just local superstition. He never returned. A week later, his notebook arrived at the Charleston Herald. No postage, no envelope, just the book itself, left on the office steps. The final page read, "I've seen them. They are not ghosts. They are something built to last. The curse isn't on the land. It's on anyone who remembers." Now, more than a century later, Willow Bend's ruins are just cracked stones in the woods. But hunters still avoid the area. Phones die there, compasses spin, and sometimes, late at night, 5 lights can be seen moving in formation through the trees, headed toward the coast, as if still marching toward a destination none of us will ever understand. Candle to be continued in Part 8, The Hall Beneath the Earth. Would you like me to continue with Part 8, 1000 Words, where the reporter's missing journal leads a modern historian into the underground remains of Willow Bend, and the true foundation is revealed? The Pritchard Curse, Part 8, The Hall Beneath the Earth. For over a century, no one dared step onto the cursed grounds of Willow Bend. Until one historian decided to uncover what the Pritchards left buried. He found a door beneath the soil. And behind it, something still alive. The story. In 1923, Professor Daniel Whitaker, a historian from Charleston University, arrived in Beaufort County. He wasn't chasing ghosts, he was chasing records. The mysterious disappearance of 5 physicians, a ruined plantation, and a journal that kept reappearing under impossible circumstances. It was the perfect story for his upcoming book, Southern Shadows. Locals warned him not to go near Willow Bend. They said animals avoided the place. That no bird ever perched on the iron gates. That sometimes, at night, the ground itself hummed. Whitaker laughed it off. But by the time he reached the edge of the property, his laughter died. The once grand plantation was nothing but skeletal walls, half buried by vines. Yet the air felt heavy. Not just still, but waiting. He spent his first night camping near the ruins. Sometime after midnight, his lantern flickered. He heard a low rhythmic thud, steady, measured, human footsteps. He called out, thinking maybe someone else had wandered in. The sound stopped. When he checked his watch, it had stopped too. At exactly 12:05 a.m. He wrote in his field notes. Greater than, the silence here feels intentional. As if the place is listening. The next morning, Whitaker began digging near the collapsed carriage house. His research had mentioned renovations made in the final months of Colonel Pritchard's life. Something about a training facility. The ground there was unnaturally level, packed firm. He used a small spade to scrape away soil, uncovering an old iron hinge. Then came the outline of a door. A heavy slab of oak, buried beneath a century of dirt. And carved into the surface, faint but visible. 5 intersecting lines forming a circle. He brushed it clean and felt the wood vibrate faintly under his palm. As if something beneath was responding to touch. Whitaker hesitated. Then he lifted the door. Cold, dry air poured out. It smelled of dust, salt, and something faintly metallic, like dried blood. His lantern light reached only a few feet before being swallowed by darkness. Stone steps descended into the earth. Walls lined with iron rails. At the bottom, the passage opened into a wide chamber. And there, in the flickering light, Whitaker saw it. A hall beneath the earth. Rows of wooden tables, straps and metal frames. And in the center, 5 tall glass cylinders, each filled with pale liquid. Within them floated the faint outlines of figures. Whitaker stepped closer. The glass was clouded, distorted, but one shape was clear. A woman's face, eyes closed, hair drifting like black silk. He stumbled backward, realizing each figure had a number carved into the base. 1 through 5, and above them, chiseled into the stone arch. The foundation endures. Whitaker's breathing quickened. The historian in him wanted to take notes. The human in him wanted to run. He leaned close to one cylinder, wiping the fog away with his sleeve. The woman inside, her skin was pale but unrotted. Preserved. And her lips were moving. Whispering. He dropped his lantern. Flames burst. Shadows leapt. The whisper grew louder, overlapping voices, 5 of them, speaking in unison. Pain is the gate. Silence is the key. Whitaker bolted for the stairs, tripping halfway up. Behind him, the sound of liquid sloshing echoed through the chamber. And the creak of glass shifting. He didn't look back. When he reached the surface, dawn was breaking. He ran straight to town, babbling about women in tanks, preserved bodies, and whispering walls. The sheriff listened just long enough to write him off as another madman. But when Whitaker returned to Charleston, he brought proof. A torn page from an old journal. It was written in Caroline Pritchard's hand. He calls it the hall beneath the earth. He says the water preserves the body and clears the mind. I think it steals the soul. If anyone finds this, know that he succeeded. We are not his daughters anymore. For the next year, Whitaker lectured publicly about his discovery. He was ridiculed by scholars and ostracized by his department. Then, one winter night in 1924, he vanished. When his assistant entered his study, the fire was still burning. But Whitaker's chair was empty, except for a single page resting on the seat. It read, "They called to me. I'm going back." That spring, a fisherman found his hat floating near the marshes outside Willow Bend. No body was ever recovered. But the sheriff who led the search claimed that, as the tide receded, he saw 5 sets of footprints leading into the mud, and only one set leading out. Decades passed. The plantation faded into legend. Children dared each other to say, "The foundation endures," 3 times by the riverbank. Old folks crossed themselves at its mention. But the land never truly rested. Animals that wandered too close were found drained, rigid, eyes wide open. And sometimes, when the moon was low, people said you could still hear hammering from beneath the earth, as if something was being built again. In 1978, a construction company tried to clear part of the old property to build a housing development. The foreman quit on the second day. He told reporters, "We hit something solid about 8 feet down, something like a roof." When asked to describe it, he just whispered, "It was breathing." The project was abandoned within a week. Now, over 100 years later, the foundation has become a myth online. Ghost hunters film YouTube videos near the ruins. Urban explorers claim to hear whispers in recordings. But one video, uploaded in 2019, stands apart. It's shaky footage, shot at night. A man in a leather jacket walks into the woods, saying, "We're at Willow Bend. Gonna find the old cellar." He opens a half-buried hatch. The camera light pans over a stairway leading down. You hear him say, "Holy hell, this goes deep." Then, 5 voices whisper together from the dark, "Welcome home." The video ends there. His channel hasn't posted since. People think, The Pritchard Curse, is about ghosts. But, it's not. It's about legacy, about something so determined to survive that even death couldn't stop it. The foundation didn't die in that underground hall. It learned. It waited. And now, it's adapting again. Candle to be continued in Part 9, The Reawakening. Would you like me to continue with Part 9, 1000 Words, where the modern paranormal team enters Willow Bend to livestream their findings, unaware that the foundation has evolved into something far more terrifying? Absolutely. Here is Part 9 of your historic horror saga, The Pritchard Curse, written in cinematic story style, 1000 haunting words, set in the modern era but still tied to the chilling history of Willow Bend. The Pritchard Curse, Part 9, The Reawakening. They thought it was just an abandoned plantation. But when the live stream began, so did the whispers. The Pritchards were not dead. They were waiting. The story. The year was 2022. A small YouTube channel called Spectre Seekers planned their most ambitious livestream yet. A full night inside the ruins of the Willow Bend Plantation, home of the Pritchard Curse. The team consisted of 4 members. Eli, the host and self-proclaimed skeptic. Nora, the tech operator. Tanner, the thrill seeker. And Jess, the historian of the group. And the only one who had read Professor Whitaker's writings. Their plan was simple. Explore the site from midnight to sunrise, stream everything live, and debunk the century-old legend once and for all. They arrived just after 11 p.m. The moon hung low and red, the air still as if the world itself were holding its breath. When they reached the iron gates, Tanner whistled. "Creepy as hell," he said. The gates, covered in rust, bore the faint carving of a phrase. "The foundation endures." As they entered the property, Nora adjusted the drone camera. The live chat scrolled fast. "This place looks cursed. I heard this site kills batteries. Don't go underground." Eli laughed at the comments. "Relax, guys. We're scientists, not ghost bait." Jess didn't smile. She carried Whitaker's old notebook, recently found in a Charleston archive. It was half-burned, pages brittle and brown. One entry was marked with a folded corner. "If the whispering stops, run. It means they've found you." They set up base near the crumbled carriage house. Nora began recording ambient readings while Tanner explored the far side of the ruins. The drone hovered above, casting long shadows over the cracked foundation. At 12:04 a.m., Their equipment began to glitch. Static rippled across the feed. Then the sound came, a soft humming, deep beneath their feet. It was steady, mechanical, rhythmic, almost alive. "Is that a generator?" Tanner asked. Jess shook her head. "There's nothing here to power." Eli grabbed a shovel from his pack and began clearing away dirt near a flat mound by the east wing. It took less than 10 minutes before the metal edge of the shovel struck something solid. Clang! They brushed away soil until an iron hinge appeared. Jess froze. "This is it," she whispered. "The door Whitaker found." The chat exploded. "Don't open it. Dude, this is insane. Live history OMG. Eli grinned at the camera. "Ladies and gentlemen, you're about to see a piece of South Carolina legend with your own eyes." He pulled the door open. A wave of cold air rushed out. The drone lights flickered, the signal dropping for 2 seconds. When the feed returned, the viewers saw the team descending the narrow stairs into the earth. The walls were damp stone. Iron rails lined the path. At the bottom, the camera caught the outline of the massive chamber Whitaker had described. The hall beneath the earth. The 5 glass cylinders were still there, covered in centuries of dust. Each filled with cloudy liquid. Shapes floated inside, distorted and pale. Tanner's voice shook. "Those are bodies, right?" Jess raised her flashlight. "The foundation," she whispered. "They preserved themselves." Eli moved closer, touching one of the tanks. The glass was warm. Then the whispers began. Soft at first. 5 voices overlapping, like a choir underwater. "Pain is the gate. Silence is the key." The chat exploded in all caps. Nora screamed, "The sensors are going off. EMF spike. Massive." Suddenly, the tank nearest to them cracked. A long fracture split down the center. Liquid spilled onto the floor, steaming in the cold air. The figure inside, once still, trembled. Eli stumbled back. "This has to be fake. There's no way." The second tank cracked. Then the third. The voices rose in unison. "We endure. We awaken." The camera shook violently. The floor began to vibrate. As if something massive was stirring beneath. Tanner dropped the light. In the flashing red of the emergency lamp, Jess saw the impossible. Eyes opening inside the tanks. 5 pairs, milky, ancient, and aware. They ran for the stairs. The live stream footage showed only chaos, shaking lights, screaming, and whispers layered over static. Halfway up, Eli turned back to grab the camera. That's when the last thing anyone saw was recorded. Behind him, 5 silhouettes emerged from the cracked tanks. Their movements were slow, graceful, like dancers underwater. But their faces, if you could call them that, were smooth, empty skin, pulsing faintly with light beneath. One of them reached toward the lens. Then, the stream cut to black. The next morning, Beaufort County Sheriff's deputies found the team's van abandoned near the gate. The live stream had gone viral overnight, over 6 million views in 12 hours before YouTube removed it. The official report said, "Trespassing and probable accident." No bodies were recovered, but 3 days later, locals found something strange by the riverbank. 5 new footprints, deep in the mud, each leading toward the water. And beside them, 5 words carved into a fallen tree trunk. "The foundation has awakened." Weeks later, strange occurrences began across the region. Livestock drained of blood, unexplained disappearances near marshlands, witnesses describing pale, silent figures watching from the treeline. In Charleston, an archivist cataloging Whitaker's journals reported finding a new entry written in fresh ink. It read, "We are many now. The hall is no longer beneath the earth. The earth is beneath us." The internet buzzed with theories. Some said it was all a hoax. Others believed specter seekers had uncovered something beyond death. A consciousness that had learned to survive, adapt, and spread. But one thing everyone agreed on. The final moments of the livestream held a whisper almost no one noticed at first. Enhanced by sound engineers, it revealed a phrase spoken in 5 voices. "We remember your names." The names of the 4 missing explorers appeared faintly carved into the wall behind the tanks. And below them, one more freshly etched. Professor Daniel Whitaker. Now the site is sealed off by the state, fenced and patrolled. No official statement has been made. But satellite images show something strange. A faint red glow at the center of the ruins. Visible only between midnight and dawn. And sometimes, just before sunrise. Residents nearby swear they hear a voice carried on the wind. Not a scream, but a whisper. The foundation endures. Candle to be continued in Part 10, The Return of the Foundation. Would you like me to continue with Part 10, Final Part, 1000 words, next, where the foundation rises again, connecting past and present in one final haunting conclusion? The Pritchard Curse. Part 10, The Return of the Foundation. They thought the past was buried. But the ground remembers. And what the Pritchards built beneath Willow Bend was never meant to die. The story. 6 months after the Spectre Seekers livestream vanished from YouTube, Willow Bend Plantation stood silent again. The state fenced off the ruins, called it unsafe for the public. But locals knew better. Every few nights, a red mist rose from the soil. And animals refused to cross the old boundary line. In Charleston, Drive, Elise Warren, an archaeologist from the University of Georgia, was the first to break the silence. She specialized in Southern folklore and had spent years studying Whitaker's journals. When she saw the viral footage, before it was deleted, she recognized something horrifying in the carvings on those glass tanks. A mark used by the Order of the Foundation, a 19th-century cult obsessed with perfection through endurance. Her grant proposal was denied. So she went alone. Elise arrived at Willow Bend on a cold November night. She parked by the riverbank where the footprints had last been seen. Fog rolled in thick as wool, curling around her boots. Each step closer to the plantation felt heavier, as if the earth itself tried to drag her down. She carried a body cam, a recorder, and Whitaker's burned notebook. The same one Jess had used before she disappeared. Her breath fogged in the air as she whispered, "This is Dr. Elise Warren, 11:47 p.m. beginning solo investigation into the Pritchard ruins." As she stepped past the fence, her flashlight dimmed. Every battery she brought began to drain, one by one. But the camera kept recording. Almost like something wanted her to continue. The ruins hadn't changed much. The mansion's skeleton loomed black against the fog. Columns split by time, ivy strangling the walls. She reached the ground where the door to the hall had once been uncovered. But the mound was gone. The earth there had caved inward. A massive sinkhole at least 20 feet deep. And from its center rose faint, pulsing light. It wasn't fire. It was alive. Elise climbed down carefully, her recorder still running. She could hear whispers again. Soft, almost like voices underwater. "We endure, we return." Then, under her boots, something moved. She knelt and brushed away the dirt, revealing a fragment of glass, warm to the touch. It pulsed with faint red light, like a heartbeat. Suddenly, her camera crackled. Through the static, a face flickered onto the screen. Eli, the host of Spectre Seekers. His eyes were hollow, mouth open, whispering words she couldn't fully hear. Then the signal cleared for just a second. He whispered, "They're not buried. They're inside." Then the screen went black. Elise's pulse raced. She turned, scanning the shadows. Something was standing on the edge of the pit. 5 figures, still as stone. Their clothes were tattered, drenched in mud. Their faces, smooth, pale, and gleaming faintly from within. The foundation. They moved in perfect unison, stepping down toward her without sound. The closer they came, the colder the air became. Until her breath froze in front of her. She raised her flashlight. The beam passed through one of them like smoke. Not flesh, not ghost, something between. Elise stumbled back, her recorder still running. She shouted, "What do you want?" The answer came not in words but in many voices overlapping. Male, female, young, old. A chorus that filled the air in her skull. "We are the perfected. Pain was our teacher. Silence was our strength. Now the world above must learn as we did." The ground began to tremble. The hole widened, and beneath it, something huge stirred. Elise realized in horror. The tanks had only been vessels. The true foundation wasn't 5 people, it was the earth itself. The roots, the soil, the veins of the land. Infused with everything the Pritchards had done below. She ran. Her camera swung wildly, capturing flashes. Shadows stretching impossibly long, faces forming in the mist. The outlines of buildings that shouldn't exist anymore. Rising and falling like waves. When she reached her car, the lights flickered on by themselves. Every radio station played the same whispering chant. Endure, endure, endure. She floored the accelerator. Behind her, the red glow flared bright enough to light the trees. For a moment, she saw the plantation reborn in that glow. Perfect, whole, and alive. And standing on the balcony, the silhouette of Colonel Pritchard himself. Smiling. 3 days later, Elisa's car was found wrecked near the highway. The airbags never deployed. Her body was never recovered. But her body cam was intact, still recording. Battery somehow at 72%. At the 11-minute mark, the video captured her voice whispering. They've gone beyond the soil. The foundation has spread. And then, faintly, as if from miles away. Do you hear it? It's under your feet. Epilogue. Today, the state of South Carolina officially denies any knowledge of the Willow Bend investigation. But satellite data still shows a faint red pulse beneath the plantation ruins. Sometimes stretching outward, as though spreading underground. Farmers along the coast report odd things. Crops growing overnight, impossibly tall. Soil turning black and warm even in winter. Animals going missing. And every so often, someone hears a faint knock coming from beneath the floorboards. 5 knocks, slow and deliberate. In Charleston, a new real estate development began construction on the old Whitaker property. The project was called Foundation Estates. The day they broke ground, workers uncovered a buried stone tablet. On it were 5 names: Virginia, Elizabeth, Margaret, Caroline, Anne, and beneath them, freshly carved though untouched by tools, one final phrase: the foundation endures. That night, one of the workers went live on TikTok, laughing about the creepy inscription. Mid-livestream, the connection cut out. Viewers caught a single frame before it ended. A shadow moving behind him. And a whisper that said, almost tenderly, "Welcome home." And that's how the legend of the Pritchards became the curse of the South itself. Pain turned to power. Endurance became contagion. And what began as one man's obsession became the horror buried in the roots of America's oldest soil. Because some foundations you can never tear down. If you felt the chill of the Pritchard Curse, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story, so others can uncover what history tried to bury. And tell me in the comments, would you spend one night at Willow Bend Plantation?